Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Taylor Clem, and I am the Environmental and Community Horticulture Agent and Master Gardener Volunteer Coordinator in Alachua County at the UF IFAS Extension Office. I will be presenting this module on irrigation techniques and best management practices as part of your Master Gardener Volunteer training course. To get things started, I'm going to go over the essential questions. So these essential questions, at the conclusion of this program, I want you to be able to answer these two questions. What are the best establishment irrigation practices for a landscape? And also, what are the basic components and maintenance requirements of an irrigation system? So before we really get started, let's talk about local and district water management ordinances. So throughout the state, there's going to be different ordinances, different restrictions that you can come by. This example that we have on the screen, this is specifically Alachua County's Alachua County's irrigation restrictions. So different counties, different water management districts, different cities, they may have different rules in place, but a lot of them are typically very similar to this. At least in Alachua County during the summer periods, we have the opportunity to irrigate at least twice a week, and during the winter time of the years, we have the ability to irrigate once a week. This is primarily because in the summer, that's our active growing season, and that's when irrigation is more needed for our plant material. As well as in the winter, there's going to be a little bit more dormancy with the plants, and the cooler temperatures, the plants aren't needing as much water as they typically do. As well, it's important to point out that with this irrigation restriction, we're not allowed to irrigate between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. That's to help improve the efficiency of our irrigation systems. So make sure that wherever you live within the state, whether it be Alachua County, Miami-Dade County, or Leon County, it doesn't matter where, but always make sure that you double check if there's any local or district water management ordinances that you have to abide by for your irrigation systems. So with the Florida-Friendly Landscaping Program, we always say, well, why irrigate? Irrigation, it can help provide the water required for sustainability of plants when rainfall is not sufficient. So I like to think that irrigation is a tool when rain isn't sufficient for our plants. So we're not getting enough rain and the plants are very stressed due to drought. Irrigation systems become that way that we can effectively and efficiently deliver water to the plants when they need it. Because it's better to have plants that are happy and healthy in the landscape than having plants die during those drought periods, because that loss can have bigger impacts. So we have ornamentals in the landscape. There's different times that we can irrigate them. So the biggest one is going to be that establishment period. So newly installed plants are irrigated frequently, and that's primarily to encourage roots to grow into the surrounding soil. We refer to this as the establishment period. And most of our irrigation restrictions, you don't have to follow those during that establishment period of plants. So those restrictions typically kick in after plant establishment. As well as when we're irrigating those ornamentals during that establishment, we're looking at frequent light irrigation applied to the root ball. So there's different times that it can take for plants to get established. So trees require 3 to 4 months per inch of caliper to become established. So if you have a 1-inch caliper tree, it's going to take 3 to 4 inches, but 3 to 4 months. But if you have a 2-inch caliper, it can be 6 to 8 months before it gets established. Shrubs, typically we're going to see them established much quicker than our trees. It's going to be 20 to 28 weeks. So it can take upwards of 6 months to get it completely established. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we're applying 2 to 3 gallons of water per inch of trunk diameter. Supplemental water the year after establishments may be necessary during dry periods to maintain healthy plants. So we like to taper off those irrigation First, let's talk a little bit about irrigation for establishment. Next, let's talk a little bit about irrigation for establishment. Trees can require 3 to 4 inches earth. Next, let's talk a little bit about trees. Next, let's talk a little about irrigation for plant establishment. So trees can require about 3 to 4 months per inch of caliper to become established. So 1 inch caliper, 3 to 4 months, a 2 inch caliper, it could be 6 to 8 months, and so on. So it can take a while for trees to get fully established in the landscape. Shrubs, they can take somewhere between 20 to 28 weeks, but it's also important that whenever we're doing type of irrigation, we apply about 2 to 3 gallons of water per inch of trunk diameter. After plants are established, you're going to need some type of supplemental water during periods of drought to make sure that we maintain plant health throughout the landscape. So we talked a little bit about ornamental plants. We talked a little bit about ornamental plants. Let's talk about turf grass. Turf grass has relatively shallow roots and requires irrigation at least once per week. Plant water need may increase with increasing temperatures, solar radiation, and day length. All turf grasses require water, whether it be through rainfall or irrigation, to maintain good health and quality. Some turf grass varieties are more drought tolerant than others. Some will grow more slowly. Others may react different to those drought conditions by turning brown until more favorable conditions arise. And the appearance during drought is not often acceptable by homeowners. It's important that whenever we do any type of irrigation to the turf, we're applying any type of the water through the irrigation system, the application should be somewhere between 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of water, with 30 to 50% of turf grass showing signs of wilt during the day. So that 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, so that's applied because 1 inch of water can fill 12 inches of our sandy soil. And that root system of a turf grass is typically going to be between the 6 and 9 inches of the soil profile. So we apply that 1/2 to 3/4 inch to make sure that we're getting water down into that soil profile where those roots are. Anything more than 3/4 of an inch is going to be excess, and you're going to lose the impact, or it's just completely lost water. But when we're thinking about only turning on the irrigation system and applying when 30 to 50% of turf grass shows signs of wilt, there's some indicators that we start to look for. So signs to irrigate your turf may include a bluish gray color to your turf grass. As you walk around in the turf grass, you can actually see your footprints in the turf grass, like you're leaving a little trail, as well as the leaf blades begin to fold up. They can fold up in half as they're trying to conserve that water that they do have within their systems, as well as you can kind of just dig around and notice that the root zone feels a little dry. So you can turn off your irrigation system, but then only turn it on and apply that 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch when you're seeing these signs of wilt. So it's important to then also think about timing. Water as needed, not routinely. Even though we have our water restrictions in Alachua County that's allowing you right now to apply twice a week and once a week in the cooler times of the year, that's not necessary. So yes, you can turn your irrigation timer on to twice a week and it automatically runs throughout the day, but go ahead and just turn your system off and only turn on your irrigation when the plants are needed. So base that off of plant appearance, or as well as you can use like soil moisture sensors to tell you what the soil moisture content of the soil is. So there's different ways that we can make sure that we're only irrigating when it's absolutely necessary and not just on a regular routine. So we always, like I mentioned, because of the growing seasons are different, during that dormant period, plants aren't using as much water, the shorter days, cooler temperatures, we don't have to irrigate nearly as much. So we do a lot less irrigation in the fall and winter time. But also, as a reminder, make sure you check your local ordinances to see if there's any different irrigation restrictions. So how to irrigate? Irrigation amount and frequency is determined by soil water holding capacity. So different soil types can hold water differently. Sandy soils are really well drained, but soils that have more organic material, clays, they can hold moisture significantly more. Plant root zone depth. So some plants, they have really deep roots and others are just really shallow in the top few inches of the landscape. So making sure that we're only irrigating based off of that plant root zone depth, as well as environmental demand. Irrigation is applied so that soil water reservoir is filled and gravity drainage and runoff do not occur. We don't want to over-irrigate our landscapes. If we start irrigating too much, you're going to see water start running off. And that's because the soil water holding capacity, you've exceeded it. So no more water can essentially enter that soil and the rest is runoff. And that can end up causing lots of issues like non-point source pollution, unintentionally carry chemicals or other pollutants down into our storm drain systems. We can end up having an impact on our water quality. Approach relies on well-designed and efficient irrigation systems. So make sure you're always checking your irrigation system, that you have a well-designed irrigation system. So if you're not familiar with the irrigations, but you're noticing things are wrong, you can always look out to experts to kind of do look at technology upgrades, as well as looking at ways that you can calibrate your system to make sure it's operating as smoothly as possible. But water ordinances may create situations where plants undergo varying levels of stress. Because in Alachua County, we can only apply on 2 days a week. There are some counties, or 2 certain days of the week. There are some counties that say that you just have 2 days of the week. So that can have some good things or bad things that occur with it. So say my plants don't need irrigation on the Saturday that it's assigned, but they need it on that next day, that Sunday. But technically I can't irrigate. So that can be some of the inconsistencies or incompatibilities with those restrictions with the plant needs. But you can always make adjustments pretty easily to make sure that your plants are okay. It's also important that plants are getting enough water, but we're not over irrigating. So when we have problems with over irrigation, we see things start to pop up all across the landscape. So with over irrigation, we see increases in plant diseases and weeds, as well as plants create shallower roots and they have a weakened root system. Nutrient runoff and leaching, that's also associated with over irrigation, as well as just wasted water. And this is one of the things that we actually see is very common within our landscape whenever we're managing, whether it be turf grass or ornamental beds. When we work with homeowners, they'll see a plant not doing well. So their instinct is to irrigate more or fertilize more, give it the food, give it all the love that they think that it needs. But in actuality, sometimes that's actually doing more harm than good. So it's important to actually understand that irrigation is a great thing to have, or can be a great tool to use in moderation and when following best management practices. So you can see on the image on the right, on the top right, you actually see dollarweed. So that dollarweed, that's an indicator of over irrigation, that there is too much moisture in the landscape. And that's a common landscape weed or turf grass weed. And that's always can be just corrected by making sure irrigation systems are calibrated or that you're not over irrigating. So we're going to check out this first video, and this is specifically like, how do you calibrate your irrigation system?
Welcome to Your Florida Lawn, the environmentally friendly way to grow and to sustain a Florida-friendly landscape. Your host is Dr. Lori Trenholm, residential turf grass specialist with the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. Join Lori and her special guests as they offer tips and solutions to maintaining a Florida-friendly lawn.
Have you ever wondered how much water you actually put out each time you run your sprinkler system? It's very easy to calibrate your sprinkler system to know exactly how much you're applying, and that's very important for a couple of reasons. Number one, we don't want to overuse water or waste water, and number two, if we apply too much water, that can be harmful to your turf. We're here at the University of Florida Plant Science Research and Education Unit today. This is where much of the turfgrass research at the University of Florida is done, and we're going to show you how to calibrate your sprinkler system. Take some flat, straight-sided containers and randomly place them around each irrigation zone. Cat food cans work great. Set out, say, 6 to 10 of those cans, and then turn your sprinklers on for a set length of time. Let's say, in our example, we'll do 15 minutes. At the end of the 15 minutes, turn the irrigation off and then measure how much water you have in each can. You want the amounts to be fairly consistent between each of the cans. If you see that one can has almost no water, well, the others all have more water, then you know that you're not getting uniform coverage, and you need to check and see what's causing your system to not be putting water out uniformly. Maybe you ran over a sprinkler head, or one got misaligned, or something like that. After you've looked for consistency, add up the amounts in each of the individual cans, divide that by the total number of cans, and that will tell you how much water you've put out for the length of time you've run your system. For example, what we just did was we applied water into 10 cans. We got a total amount from the 10 cans of 2.5 inches of water. That means that in 15 minutes, we applied 1/4 inch in each can. That's how much our irrigation system is putting out in 15 minutes. So how much water should you apply to your lawn each time you irrigate? University of Florida recommendations call for anywhere from 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of water each time you irrigate for most lawns. So based on our example, you would need to run your irrigation system for 30 to 45 minutes to apply the proper amount of water. One thing that you need to remember, and be careful of this, since water pressure can vary throughout the day, you need to do your calibration at the same time that your irrigation system does come on. Usually this is first thing in the morning. So get up early one of these mornings and go outside and calibrate your sprinkler system. You'll probably have your neighbors wondering what you're doing, so pass this message along to them too. In other sessions, we'll talk about getting up close and personal with your sprinkler system and how to let your lawn tell you when it needs to be watered. From the University of Florida Extension Service and Florida Friendly Landscaping, I'm Dr. Lori Trenholm with your Florida Lawn.
Thank you for joining us for this segment of Your Florida Lawn. For more information on how to maintain your Florida-friendly landscape, please visit our website or contact your local University of Florida County Extension office.
Excellent. So calibrating your irrigation system is routinely one of the best things that you can do, or one of the best things that you can do on an annual basis. Doing that calibration can make sure that you have uniform distribution of water from your irrigation system to your turf grass or landscape beds. We're going to check out a video about irrigation controllers and how we can manage or set those and why they're important.
Welcome to Your Florida Lawn, the environmentally friendly way to grow and sustain a Florida-friendly landscape. Your host is Dr. Lori Trenholm, residential turf grass specialist with the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. Join Lori and her special guests as they offer tips and solutions to maintaining a Florida-friendly lawn.
Have you ever wondered what an irrigation controller really does? How does it make your irrigation system come on? What are all these buttons and knobs and dials here? And how can you adjust any of these to get the maximum irrigation efficiency for your lawn? Sometimes these contraptions can be pretty confusing, and actually when homeowners don't understand how to best utilize their irrigation controller, they're not going to get maximum irrigation efficiency. Here to help explain some of what this controller actually does today is Dr. Michael Dukes. Michael is an associate professor in the Agricultural and Biological Engineering Department at the University of Florida, and his specialization is working on these irrigation controllers and research related to them. So Michael, start by showing us, if you would, what is an irrigation zone?
An irrigation zone, also called an irrigation or station on this controller, is essentially a way to break up the irrigation system into pieces that can be watered with the water supply fed to the house. There's not enough water to water the entire lawn all at once, so you have these zones. And the zones are operated by solenoid valves, which are connected to the controller.
Now, how many zones would a lawn like this one have?
This lawn here has 4 zones.
Okay.
Many typical lawns have 4 to 6 zones.
All right, and one zone gets irrigated at a time, correctly?
That's correct.
Okay.
One right after the other.
So, Michael, how would one change the frequency or the number of days with which they irrigate?
The frequency, you can see this controller here is pointed to off, and it particularly tells you how it's operating because the last number blinks when it's off. When you turn it to an irrigation schedule, the time stays fixed. You can look at this one, and on Monday it says off, so it's not going to run on Monday. On Tuesday it says on, and then on Wednesday off, Thursday off, Friday on. Saturday and Sunday are also off. So this one's set for 2 days a week on a custom schedule.
Now, how would you change this? Say if you wanted to go from 2 days a week to 1 day a week, perhaps during the winter months, how would you turn one of those days off?
On this controller, it's pretty simple. They all vary a little bit, but you can see here it says on and off, so you just hit off, and now Friday's off.
That sounds pretty simple. So folks could very easily adjust the number of irrigations that their lawn is getting throughout the week.
Correct.
Very easily. Now, one final thing that we need to talk about with this is how long should our irrigation system actually run, and how does one adjust that?
That's a good question, too. That depends on your particular area. Generally, we recommend a half to 3/4 of an inch. Of course, on here, it doesn't say half or 3/4 of an inch. But you can see this one here is set for 60 minutes. And it depends on the equipment. Rotary sprinklers are typically 45 to 60 minutes per cycle, and that's a half to 3/4 of an inch, typically. Spray heads are a little bit less, or sometimes a lot less, depending on how they're spaced. So you can see here, Zone 1 is set for 60 minutes run time. Zone 2 is 60 minutes run time, and those are both rotary sprinklers. Zone 3 is 60 minutes, and then Zone 4 is 30 minutes, and that's a set of spray heads.
Spray heads. So you should know how long it takes you to put out the half to 3/4 of an inch of water.
Correct.
And we cover that in another video segment called How to Calibrate Your Sprinkler System. But I think, you know, this makes it pretty easy for a homeowner to actually be able to open this up and figure out how to apply the correct amount of water. And of course, some of the other things they want to look for are irrigation efficiency. They should watch their system run periodically, make sure they don't have broken spray heads. What other recommendations would you have?
Well, another thing to program that's very important is the irrigation start time. And you can see this controller has 1, 2, 3 potential start times. And this one is set to start at 6 a.m. So the Zone 1 will come on at 6 a.m., run for 60 minutes. Zone 2 will then come on after Zone 1, run for 60 minutes, so on and so forth. You could have multiple start times if that were necessary, if there was a runoff issue or a slope. And then, of course, the typical settings for date and time. And that's really about it. There is a percentage adjustment so that if you wanted to adjust percentage, if an area was shady and needed a little bit less water than some of the other areas, you could do that.
That's a great feature because we do need to irrigate those areas less than the ones that are in full sun.
Right.
All right. What other words of advice should we give folks? What about use of a rain shutoff sensor?
That's a good point. By Florida statute, most irrigation systems are required to have a rain shutoff device or a rain sensor. And that's wired into this controller. Different controllers vary slightly, but essentially it deactivates the signal between the controller and the valve when the rain shutoff is wet or after rainfall. And then when it dries out, the controller works on its normal schedule as we saw programmed here. And also homeowners should be mindful of the water restrictions if it's 2 days a week, 1 day a week, or 3 days a week.
Right, have to follow those regulations.
Yeah. Right.
And of course, you know, one of the best things that a homeowner can do is look at your lawn. If it's showing signs of wilt, then perhaps you need to adjust your irrigation controller if regulations allow for that. But quite often, homeowners overwater or apply irrigation too frequently or for too long a period of time. So keep an eye on your lawn and let it tell you if it's going thirsty or if it's doing real well with the water it's getting.
Good point.
Michael, one last question. What would be an example of when a person would want to turn this controller to off?
A good time to do that would be when it's rainy, for example, maybe in the summer, or in the wintertime when the turf is dormant. You would just simply turn it off.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Dukes, thank you so much for sharing your expertise here with us this morning. We really appreciate this, and this is very valuable information. From the University of Florida IFAS Extension Service and Florida Friendly Landscaping, I'm Dr. Lori Trenholm for your Florida Lawn.
Thank you for joining us for this segment of Your Florida Lawn. For more information on how to maintain your Florida-friendly landscape, please visit our website or contact your local University of Florida County Extension office.
So that video is a wonderful example of talking how we can work with our irrigation controllers. So one of the things is there's multiple types of brands and styles of irrigation controllers. So they're not always going to look exactly like the one in that video, but that is a common example. Some of our irrigation controllers now can even link up to your smartphone or weather stations or other soil moisture sensors to make sure that you're irrigating as efficiently as possible, as well as making it easier to schedule your irrigation timers. So native plants in irrigation. Native plants do not require less water than non-native plants. And landscapes are often very different from the native conditions where plants originated. So native plants can have a significant impact or quality to our landscape, but sometimes those environmental conditions that we're planting them, especially in newly developed landscapes, that environment is so different than where those native plants are originally from, that it can actually be very difficult to get some of the native plants established in that landscape. But overall, the native plants and non-native plants, they don't have any different water requirements. So for landscape system design, we have to make sure that there's a few things that we have to consider when we're talking about irrigation system design or irrigation systems just in general. One of those have to do with pressure. Operating pressure of an irrigation system is very important. You have to make sure that the operating pressure of the system must not exceed the source pressure. And there's some other issues that you can think about. Micro irrigation, they need a lower operating pressure, whereas like a pop-up rotors and other traditional irrigation methods, they require a little bit higher pressure to make sure that they're functioning properly. Use devices that result in uniform coverage. So make sure that you're using the same rotors or the same bubblers all in the same zone together. Don't mix and match different irrigation water distribution devices. Keep them uniform throughout the zone. Now, you can change the type of irrigation or water distribution that you have within the zone or between zones, just as long as the zones are uniform and the same. Make sure you're not irrigating any non-target areas. So like you can see the image on the bottom right, a lot of water is on that sidewalk. Sidewalk doesn't need irrigation to grow. In fact, actually water on that sidewalk can make it break down in weather quicker than if it was just left dry, as well as know the water needs of plants. You can design and develop an irrigation system based off the plants that are going to be in that landscape. So by doing that, you can make sure that by understanding the water needs, that you can design and address the landscape or the irrigation system most appropriately. Talking about the irrigation system, there's a couple things that we need to think about. Is water supply, water conveyance, and then as well as distribution. So water supply is essentially, that's exactly what it is. What is our water source? Where's it coming from? Water conveyance is how we move that water across and around that landscape with like the pipes, and then the distribution has to do with like micro irrigation, pop-up rotors, etc. So a water supply is primarily potable water, so that's the clean water that we're typically getting through municipal systems. We have groundwater, so say you're using a well and you're pumping that water up from the aquifer or other groundwater source. We have reclaimed water, so reclaimed water, that's going to be typically when we see the purple pipes or the purple housings around irrigation systems, that is water that's been treated at a wastewater management plant, and then that's being repumped out for irrigation purposes. And then there's also a surface water supply where you're just pulling water from like lakes and rivers, etc., any superficial water body. Water conveyance, so that's how we move the water into the system and around the system. So we have different things that we have within the landscape. Some are required, some are not. So in the top image, what you're actually seeing is a backflow preventer. So as you go around and you look at different homes, commercial buildings, you're always going to see a backflow preventer. It is required by law. So essentially, it keeps water that leaves the water source or the water supply and goes into the irrigation system or even just a home. Say something were to happen, it prevents water from moving itself backwards into that treated supply. So it helps protect water quality within the system before it goes out to the landscape. So that's a backflow preventer. Typically, they're hiding in the landscape, and they have to be they typically have to be up in the air as per code. So you're going to see those around the landscapes. But then also we have all of our different zones. So we looked a little bit at that irrigation controller, the timer on the wall, but then that tells the valves when to open. That's what turns on those different zones. So we have a valve within our system, and you can see that in the bottom right, those are 3 valves that will turn on at 3 separate times. And the irrigation controller just shoots a short little pulse of electricity and it kicks on that valve, which then releases the water out into the system or out into that zone, where then you can get to distribution devices. And that's like your micro irrigation, your pop-up rotors, etc. So those are the main components of an irrigation system. So let's talk a little bit about reclaimed water, since it is an important source, and we use a lot of it throughout landscapes for irrigation, as well as it's growing more and more in its use. So reclaimed water for irrigation does not typically contain salt, but should be tested periodically. If you're getting it from a municipal supply, they do regular reports on talking about reclaimed water quality, so you can see what's in the water, the pH of the water, etc. So you can always monitor those numbers to make sure there isn't anything that could impact your plant material. It actually can contain plant nutrients that can change your fertility program, or what type of fertilizers you should apply, or how much of those fertilizers that you should apply. Now, it's inconsistent throughout the state, so each municipality you're going to have to double check, but there are easy ways where you can look at how much parts per million of certain nutrients are in the reclaimed water, and you can convert that to kind of figure out how much of that specific nutrient is being applied with your irrigation system throughout the year. As well as the water will differ, like I mentioned, with different specific wastewater treatment plants. So you can't always rely on looking at other individuals' data. You have to look at the data and information from that specific water treatment facility that you're getting that reclaimed water from. So talk a little bit about the distribution devices. And in this image, we can actually see multiple different types of distribution devices. How many of these can you identify, or how many of these do you at least recognize? So when we're looking at these, there's multiple that we can see. If I'm working from the left to the right, so that's like a micro spray irrigation. And then we have a pop-up rotor. That's the second one. That's very traditional. We see those for turf grass areas. The third one, that's like a little mister. And those are great for raised vegetable beds or gardens like that, but they also do really well in ornamental beds. The fourth one, that's actually a drip line, or micro drip irrigation. And then the fourth one, that is like a bubbler. Sometimes we'll see those specifically around the base of trees if they need to have more irrigation. And the one on the far right, that's our very traditional irrigation distribution device, is an impact sprinkler. But I want to talk a little bit about micro irrigation emitters, because those are one of the best things that we can use in our ornamental beds as well as our vegetable gardens to use water as efficiently as possible. So we typically consider this like drip tubing. You've probably seen it before. Inline drip is another example, but it's ideal for narrow plantings, and it has very minimal lateral water movement. So that water is pretty much, it's coming out of an emitter in the tube, and it just moves down in a straight column. So typically those tubings are going to be spaced very closely, or you're going to lay out the tube so it's laying specifically on the root balls of every single plant within the landscape. So it's also important to make sure that when you work with micro irrigation, one of the drawbacks is that they can clog or leak very easily, but it's not always apparent when you see that. So you always put a filter at the beginning of the system to make sure we're trying to keep anything out of the micro irrigation before it clogs up any of the emitters. But just regular maintenance throughout the year. Sometimes you can open up those systems and flush them, as well as just do regular maintenance, checking for leaks. And if you find any leaks, it's very easy to cut out bad areas and put in a new part of the irrigation tubing. And it's very easy from a homeowner perspective in order to install and manage a micro irrigation system. After going over the irrigation techniques module, we should now be able to answer these two essential questions. What are the best establishment and irrigation practices for a landscape? And then what are the basic components and maintenance requirements of an irrigation system? So as you learn more about irrigation, as you dive deeper into the Master Gardener program, you're going to learn more about how we can use irrigation as efficiently as possible and as effectively as possible, because it's one of those things where we can make minor changes working with homeowners very easily that can lead to big impacts on water conservation as well as water quality. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your local extension office, talk with your Master Gardener volunteer coordinator, or look out for additional CEUs that are associated with irrigation. Thank you very much.